I was a man of shadows, a shepherd hiding from a past I couldn't outrun. The desert was my silence, until the mountain began to speak. I saw a fire that defied the laws of the earth, a bush that burned with the light of 1,000 suns, yet not a single leaf turned to ash. Then came the voice, rolling like thunder across the sand. Take off your sandals, Moses, for the ground you stand upon is holy. The voice asked me, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," I said, "just a piece of dead wood to lean on when the mountain gets steep." I didn't know it was a scepter waiting to be born. I threw it down as I was told, and the wood came alive. It breathed, it hissed. It became the very thing I feared most in the desert heat, a serpent of the dust. Then the voice said, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." My mind screamed no, but my soul said yes. Because if God can turn wood into life, what can he do with a man like me? The voice told me to put my hand into my cloak. When I pulled it out, it wasn't mine anymore. It was white as the moon, dead as the stones beneath my feet. I felt the cold sting of a curse I hadn't earned. But then, I did it again. I obeyed the command, and just as quickly as the winter had come to my skin, the spring returned. The death was gone. My flesh was whole. I finally understood. This wasn't just about magic tricks in the sand. This was about a God who holds the power over life and death. And he was holding me. I told the fire the truth. I am not a man of silver tongues. My words trip, and my voice shakes like a reed in the wind. But the Creator does not look for eloquence. He looks for a vessel. He told me my brother Aaron was already on his way. He would be the mouth, and I would be the heart. Together, two brothers would face the greatest empire on earth. Egypt. The land that wanted my head now feels the weight of my feet. The sun is different here. It smells of stone and river silt. They build in gold and granite to live forever, but they do not know the God of the thorn bush, the God of the living. The staff is in my hand, Aaron is at my side, and the voice is everywhere. The pillars are taller than the cedars of Lebanon. The gold is bright enough to blind. But I have seen a fire that makes this palace look like a shadow. I stood before the man who thinks he is a god. He looked at my rags and my dust, and he laughed. He did not hear the thunder behind my breath. I spoke the words the fire gave me. No more hiding, no more running. Thus says the Lord, let my people go. He asked me, who is this Lord that I should obey him? And in that moment, the battle for a nation began. The voice told me to strike the water, the river they worship, the river that gives them life. I felt the wood tremble in my hand as the sky turned the colour of a bruise. One touch was all it took. The blue turned to rust. The sweet water turned to iron and salt. The heart of Egypt stopped beating in a single moment. It was the first cry of a dying empire, a warning written in red across the sand. This was no longer a debate, it was a reckoning. The river had died, but the earth was waking up. 1 billion tiny heartbeats rose from the mud, marching where no army could go. They climbed the walls of the mighty. They slept in the ovens of the poor. There was no corner of Egypt that remained silent. Pharaoh called for his magicians, but they only added to the plague. You cannot fight the Creator by mimicking his wrath. The voice commanded, "Strike the dust." The very earth that fed them, the ground they called holy, was about to wake up. Every grain of sand became a sting. Every breath was a battle. The air itself turned into an army that no war could keep out. For the first time, the magicians fell silent. "This is the finger of God," they whispered. But Pharaoh's heart remained as hard as the desert stone. The voice spoke a new word. "I will set a sign. A wall of air that no fly could cross. A line drawn in the dust between the slave and the master." In the cities of the Nile, the sun went dark under the weight of wings. The air became a sting, and the houses became prisons of gold. But in the fields of Goshen, there was peace. The Creator was choosing his side, and the world was beginning to notice. The hand of the Creator moved over the fields. The wealth of the empire, the gods they carved in stone, began to return to the dust. The chariots of Pharaoh stood still, the stables were silent. The pride of Egypt was dying in the morning light. But in the land of the slaves, not a single lamb was lost. The great separation was no longer a sign, it was a judgment. The voice said, "Take the soot of the fire." The very coals they used to bake their bread and forge their swords were about to become their curse. I threw the black earth to the heavens, and the sky breathed it back. A fine mist of misery that touched the skin of every master and every guard. The magicians could no longer stand before me. Their magic could not heal the fire in their own veins. The pride of the flesh was finally broken. The voice said, "Stretch out your hand." I looked up, and the heavens I had known all my life were gone. The sky became a forge of ice and flame. It was a miracle of contradictions. Lightning that ran along the ground like water. Ice that carried the heat of a furnace. The pride of the harvest was crushed in a heartbeat. For a moment, Pharaoh trembled. He smelled the smoke of his dying kingdom. But the storm in his heart was still more violent than the storm in the sky. The voice said, "Stretch out your hand over the land." The wind obeyed first, a hot, dry breath from the east that carried the hunger of 1 billion mouths. They didn't just fly, they consumed. They ate the bark from the trees and the hope from the hearts of the masters. The earth itself seemed to crawl. When the wind finally turned, there was nothing left for a bird to perch on. Egypt was a skeleton of a kingdom, waiting for the final blow. The voice said, "Let let there be darkness. Not the soft rest of evening, but a blackness so thick you could touch it. A midnight that wouldn't end. For 3 days the empire turned to stone. No man rose from his place, no fire could burn. Egypt was buried alive in a grave of shadows. But where the slaves slept, the sun never set. The Creator was lighting the way home, even as the world around us went blind. The voice said, "One more plague." The night was silent, but it carried the weight of 400 years. We waited behind the blood, and we listened. The destroyer passed by. A cry rose from the palaces that had never known sorrow. The heart of the empire finally broke in the middle of the night. The doors were thrown open, not by us, but by the hands of our captors. The road was long, but for the first time, the air smelled like home. The mountains were on our left, the sea was on our right, and the ghost of our past was screaming behind us. There was nowhere left to run. The voice said, "Why do you cry to me? Tell the people to go forward." I touched the hem of the ocean, and the deep, it simply stepped aside. We walked where no man was ever meant to walk, between the weight of 1 billion tons of salt and the promise of a God who does not
The
lie.
Lord provides our way.
Pharaoh
Do not
thought
fear.
the path was his. He thought the sea was a servant of the crown. He forgot that the deep only listens to its master. I stretched out my hand and the walls gave way. The roar was louder than 1,000 lions. In a heartbeat, the pride of Egypt was buried in the salt. The past is under the waves. The chains are at the bottom of the sea. We are no longer slaves. We